Hi everybody, my name's Julia from Bobbins and Buttons. My business and my channel are all about helping people to make clothes that they love. In this video I'm going to show you how to make a lining pattern for the Jayne dress, which is the style that I'm wearing. So the Jayne dress is a very simple pinafore style dress. It's got no zips, it just fastens at the shoulders with two buttons. So it's a lovely simple quick make. But lots of people have contacted me and asked if I would share how to make a lining for it. So at the moment the pattern has two versions and they're both finished with a neck facing around the upper edge, which helps to stabilise for the buttons and buttonholes. So I'm going to show you how to make a full lining pattern, and then I'm going to follow up with a second video showing you how to use the pattern and make it into the actual lined dress. So I'm going to show you how to make the lining for the patch pocket style Jayne dress. So it's the one with the solid front and patch pockets rather than the split front. So I'm going to show you the method using the front panels. So I've scaled the pattern to a much smaller size so that you can see the whole thing within the camera frame. If you need any adjustments to the size, or like the full bust adjustment, or any different adjustments to any parts of the dress, it's best to do that to start with and then use your adjusted piece to make the lining pattern. But I'm going to suggest that this is the fully altered pattern piece, and so in this case we've got a front neck facing, but we have no lower part of lining, which is what you generally have with a lined dress. So that's the piece of pattern that we're going to need to make. So I'm just going to talk through the equipment that I'm going to use to make this pattern piece. So you'll need a ruler with a right angle. So I like to use my trusty Pattern Master. It's got all sorts of useful lines on it, but any ruler, a quilt ruler or any other ruler with a right angle will also be fine for this, for making this pattern piece. Then you'll also need a pair of paper scissors. So I always like to make sure I've got a pair of paper scissors that are dedicated to just cutting paper, because if you use your fabric scissors for cutting paper, they will go blunt very, very quickly. You'll also need some tape. I quite like to use this magic tape because it can be peeled off and it's very smooth, and also you can write on it quite easily. So it's quite a useful type of tape to have for pattern cutting. But you can also use masking tape, sellotape, brown tape, or even a glue stick. Then you'll need a pencil. You can use a mechanical pencil, or I just like to use a traditional pencil, but I actually quite like to use HB pencils. But you'll need, if you don't use a very hard pencil, you'll need to make sure you're sharpening it really regularly. So have a pencil sharpener handy to make sure it stays nice and sharp all the time, because accuracy is really important with pattern cutting. For this video I'm going to use a red biro just so that you can see, hopefully see the lines a little bit better. And then you can either, I quite like to have some weights handy to weigh the pattern down so when you're drawing round it doesn't move. So you could either use weights, or you could actually pin the pattern down as well, but I'll just show you that when we get to those points. So I'm going to just start by bringing in a piece of paper. So again, paper wise you can use anything that's large piece of paper. Spot and cross is great because it's nice and robust, but it's also got these spots and crosses which are lined up, so you can use those as another gauge to check you're straight. So to start with, I've got the front pattern piece with the darts marked on it, and I'm going to just literally draw around this whole piece. So what I'm going to do to start with is I like to use weights, so I'm just going to lay the weights on the pattern piece so it doesn't move around. I've lined the centre front up with the spots and crosses because that'll give me a good guideline as I carry on with the pattern piece to know that I'm square. So now I'm just going to draw around the edge of this. With the Jayne pattern, it's printed onto a nice thick paper, so it's quite easy to draw around the edge. But if this was a tissue pattern that you were using, you might prefer to use a tracing wheel and place the pattern on top of the paper and use the tracing wheel to trace off. So because it's not quite so easy to draw around the edges, but let's just draw around here. So what I've also done is I've made a little hole with a pin at the point of the dart, and I'm just going to put my pen through there so that it marks that point on the pattern below, and then I'm going to mark the end of the dart legs for the size that I'm doing. So I've got all of that marked, and I can just now take the pattern piece off and I can use my ruler just to draw that dart back in so I can see where it is. So that's our perfect copy traced off of the master pattern. And now what we can do is bring in the facing piece. So with this dress pattern, you've got a faced neck edge, which is just unlined below the facing. But so what we're going to generate is a pattern piece for below the facing. So you can see that this facing piece is exactly the same size. It's a perfect copy of the neck edge. So that's a great starting point for creating our lining pattern. So I'm going to lay this on, matching up the edges, and I'm going to draw that lower edge as our starting point for making this pattern. And essentially what we want for our lining pattern is this to be self fabric and this to be lining fabric. So really all we need to do is create a seam allowance on this line here for the two pieces. So now that I've drawn the front facing on, I can see this line is quite close to the dart, and we don't want the dart to be stitched into the seam that we create between the facing and the lining. So what I'm going to do is use the facing pattern as it is, but then I'm going to add the seam allowance twice to this edge of the lining, and that'll take it further away from the dart. So because this is such a small scale, I'm just going to say 1/2 centimetre equals our 1.5 seam allowance, and so therefore 1 centimetre will be twice the seam allowance. So I'm going to add on 1 centimetre, which is twice our seam allowance. So I'm keeping that now as our master pattern for the lining as well, and I'm just going to add on the double seam allowance to this edge. So the way I'm doing that, because this ruler has got centimetre increments, I can add the 1 centimetre line, just follow the 1 centimetre line around that curve, just adding little marks at increments, and that copies that exact curve 1 centimetre higher. You can also do this with a tape measure or a ruler and just mark 1 centimetre every so often, but what we want is that exact accurate curve copied the 2 centimetre distance above it. So that's now drawn. I'm going to cut that out and show you how that looks. So there's our lining, our front lining piece. So now if I bring the original dress, so this is the front of the dress and that's going to stay as the front of the dress. I've got the lining and I've got the facing piece, so that overlaps, but when that's stitched together that's going to become exactly the same size as the front panel. So there's a couple of things here we can also do. One, we can add some notches. So what I would recommend doing is taking the pattern and just marking, just walking the pattern along and marking a point roughly near the end of the dart there that you can use as a notch on both your lining pattern and your facing pattern. And the second thing to consider is the hem. So I'm going to leave this at exactly the same length as the dress, but when we come to make it, we're going to want our lining to be a little bit shorter. But at this point, I haven't decided exactly how deep I want to make the hem and whether I want to make the dress a little bit shorter. So I'm going to leave that, but I know that at the moment they're exactly the same, so I can trim that down when I come to making it. And I'm going to show you making this dress in the next tutorial. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. If you've got any further questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. I will be following up with the how to make tutorial quite soon, so if you'd like to stay tuned for that, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.